On November 15, 2013, Chris called 911. He said he had arrived home and found his parents unresponsive in their truck. Chris said that Roger was coughing and that Melissa's head was bobbing up and down. He said they were alive but barely moving. The dispatcher asked Chris to put them on their backs to try to administer CPR. Roger and Melissa had both been shot in the right side of their heads. Melissa Blumel died the next day, and Roger Blumel died about 5 weeks later. Roger Blumel was born on January 17, 1965, into a household bustling with many members, including his parents and 7 children, 6 boys and a girl. Roger's family was not only large but also very united, raised with a strong sense of values and community life. Even while still in high school, Roger proved to be a hard-working young man with goals for the future. He began driving his father's truck and, after graduating from the local high school, worked in concrete transportation. Later, he discovered that his true calling was in sales, a field in which he eventually found success. According to his friends, he was one of those people capable of selling ice to Eskimos. This skill was also accompanied by a generous, cheerful, and extroverted personality. He always seemed happy, and nothing pleased him more than making everyone around him have a big smile on their faces. Roger had a good life and an excellent relationship with his family. The only thing missing was a partner, and one day he achieved that too. The details are not specified, but a close friend later recounted that at the end of the evening when he met a young woman who captivated him, Roger declared with absolute resolution that she was the woman he was going to marry. The girl in question was named Melissa. She was born in Wichita on January 1, 1960. Her childhood, too, was spent in a loving family comprised of 3 girls and 3 boys, though a younger sister died before reaching her first birthday. Melissa was a sweet, hard-working girl, always ready to help not just her family but everyone around her. She began working as a cashier at a bank where she made a successful career. In the following years, her seriousness, commitment, and sense of collaboration earned her several promotions that led her to become the vice president of the bank. That first meeting marked the beginning of the union of 2 soulmates who married in 1991. Life for the Blumels seemed perfect as Melissa climbed the ranks within the bank, and Roger's charm led him to establish his own business. Roger loved to share time with friends and bring joy to everyone around him. In Melissa, he found the perfect companion. Moreover, both had a strong social consciousness that led them to collaborate and participate in any charitable, sports, or collective activity that took place in their community. However, as we've seen in almost all stories, a perfect life does not exist, and for the Blumels, the only thing missing was a child to bring laughter and joy to their loving home. Unfortunately, this desire remained elusive for the couple, and after years of unsuccessfully trying to conceive, Roger and Melissa began to consider the idea of adopting a child. With this intention, they contacted a local social worker. Their wishes were heard, and doubly so, as a woman named Keisha Schaberg had put up her 2 sons for adoption. Anthony, 7 years old, whom everyone called Tony, and Christopher, 4 years old, known as Chris. Keisha's idea was to place them in an open adoption so she could maintain contact with her sons and the family raising them. However, the Blumels did not consider this the best option, as they wanted to raise the children as their own, and completely remove them from what had been a tough start in life. In the end, Roger and Melissa's approach prevailed, and from that moment, Tony and Chris formally became part of the Blumel family, starting to enjoy a life they never knew existed. In fact, it was later known that Tony was amazed he was allowed to have dinner every day. The children quickly adapted and began to enjoy their new life. They attended elementary school and successfully completed that stage as good students. In high school, they were also successful, had no problems with their peers, were fully integrated and made a wide group of friends, and excelled in sports, particularly in wrestling and football. Tony made rapid progress in wrestling, securing second place in a competition in his division. At that time, everything seemed to promise a bright future for the boys and a happy life for the whole family. But the Blumels' world began to turn upside down when Tony reached his senior year of high school. The young man began to change what had until then been exemplary behavior. He turned into someone who was constantly in conflict with his parents, accusing them of always favoring his younger brother Chris. From then on, he engaged in alcohol consumption, disregarded curfews, and even smoked marijuana. Things in the Blumel household became chaotic, and soon it seemed that the last hope for the young man to correct his path was lost. For a long time, Tony had expressed a fervent desire to join the United States Air Force after finishing high school. But this dream dissipated due to his own behavior when, in 2013, he was arrested for an unspecified act of aggression, and shortly after graduating, again for driving under the influence of alcohol. With these records, he could say goodbye to a future in military aviation. These events did not lead Tony to reflect. On the contrary, it plunged him into a downward spiral. Once he graduated from high school, his life had no direction. He did not want to continue studying, nor did he want to work. In fact, he wanted to do nothing more than sleep late and spend the rest of his day immersed in a cloud of cannabis smoke. Melissa lived in terror of the boy's outbursts of rage. And amidst all this situation, which was so difficult to bear, there was something else that the Blumels did not know. Since the spring of 2013, through social media, Keisha had been contacting her biological sons. While it seems Chris either rejected Keisha's friend request or was not very receptive to communicating with his biological mother, Tony not only accepted immediately, but was also completely excited to reconnect with his real mother. Keisha had been devastated after giving her sons to the Blumels. Although she was relieved to know that both had been welcomed into the same good family and would stay together, she could not resign herself to the lack of contact. Reconnecting with her eldest son filled Keisha with excitement, but at the same time she developed a great resentment towards the Blumels, believing that they had turned Chris against her. However, this feeling was undoubtedly overshadowed by the happiness of reconnecting with her firstborn. Additionally, the news of Tony's problems with his adoptive parents fueled Keisha's hope of reuniting with her son, and she wasted no time in offering him to come to see her. Meanwhile, at the adoptive family's home, far from improving, things were getting worse. The conflict reached a point of no return when one day, in the midst of one of his fits of rage, Tony punched a hole in a wall. This was the turning point for the Blumels. They could no longer risk their own safety and that of Chris. After several unsuccessful discussions trying to put an end to the eldest son's behaviors, Roger and Melissa came to the difficult decision to tell Tony that he had to leave the house. The young man initially wandered aimlessly but soon realized he had to do something to sustain himself, so he got some jobs at fast food restaurants and supplemented those meager earnings by selling cannabis. Although he slept like a nomad from night to night at some friends' houses, he ended up associating with a group of youths who were deeply involved in excessive drug use. And amid all these despairing events, A lifeline suddenly appeared for Tony when Keisha told him to come to California to live with her. Tony eagerly accepted the invitation, and the reunion took place in September 2013 at Keisha's house in California. The young man was accompanied by his best friend from high school, Braden, who had dropped out in his junior year to dedicate himself to drug dealing. The two young men were excited because they arrived with the hope of having Keisha's support, who was also versed in the drug trade, to start a large marijuana business in the area, and they even talked about entering the medical cannabis market. The reality was that the two young men had arrived to live in a small apartment which had only one room. It is not hard to imagine that the situation in the place began to be tense, particularly because Sean, Keisha's partner, had two jobs and was the only one bringing in money to cover the expenses for 5 people. Keisha only contributed a part of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Keisha, Tony, and Braden spent their days using drugs, and the woman's younger daughter was all the time under that bad influence. Logically, at one point things reached an unacceptable limit, something that happened when Sean found out that Tony and Braden were selling marijuana near her house. She let them know that what they were doing was simply unacceptable and dangerous for her as the property owner. Consequently, she told them to take their drugs elsewhere. Additionally, after this episode, Sean gave an ultimatum to the house occupants. Everyone had to get a job or leave the apartment. Far from making the group reflect, as was her intention, what it achieved was that they formed an alliance to show indignation towards her. They decided to leave the apartment and go to a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. But that was not the solution either, because without having an income, after those weeks they had no means to sustain the hotel payment. The need for money did not make them consider working decently. The first idea they had was to return to Kansas, perhaps because it was familiar territory for Tony in terms of drug dealing. After almost a day on the road, the group decided to stop in Arizona and spend the night at a hotel. It was there that Tony told his travel companions that he had come up with an idea, which was to end the lives of his adoptive parents to claim the inheritance. Once they arrived in Wichita and found accommodation at a hotel they rented for a month, they dedicated themselves to refining the details of that idea. It was a simple solution. They had to end the lives of Roger and Melissa, claim the insurance, sell the assets, and use the resources to start a new, larger-scale drug business. Tony was convinced that the original family, which he had returned to, would become rich by cultivating and selling marijuana. Tony even proposed a perfect day to carry out the crime. It would be Friday, November 15th of that year, 2013, as his brother Chris would not be at home, as he had to attend an event related to his wrestling practice. Tony had been a star in that discipline and still maintained contact with some team members, which is how he learned about his brother's commitment that night. Gradually, the plan was formed, in which Tony would communicate with Roger and Melissa and invite them somewhere with the excuse of talking about what had happened between them and try to fix things. Tony's idea was that, while there was no one at home, Braden would take Keisha to the residence so she could enter and steal some valuables. Tony also knew where his adoptive parents kept a significant amount of money for emergencies. The idea was that the act would appear to be a robbery gone wrong. But from the beginning, the final intention was clear. When Roger and Melissa returned home, Keisha would end their lives. Everyone thought it was an excellent plan, but later, Braden backed out. He did not want to participate in the act, but agreed to help by acquiring the guns they would need. As a substitute, he recommended a friend of his, also a former high school peer named Andrew, who could take on the role as the driver to take Keisha to the Blumels' residence. As promised, Braden procured 2 pistols purchased from other criminals. It should be mentioned that there was never any intention to share the money with Andrew, who was agreed to be paid $1,000 to act essentially as a driver and support for Keisha in the robbery. In the end, she would be the executor. In early November, Keisha posted on her social networks a photo of her with Tony and a caption that read, "A bond that cannot be broken." Finally, the day arrived. It was Friday, November 15th, 2013, and as Tony had predicted, his wonderful adoptive parents did not refuse to meet with him. The meeting went peacefully. While at the Blumels' house, the scene was completely different. As soon as Roger and Melissa left for the meeting, Keisha and Andrew entered the house, forced the garage door, and began to rummage through everything. They took the opportunity to take some small, valuable items and the cash the couple kept in the house for any eventuality. Once the first part of the plan was carried out, Keisha and Andrew hid beside the secluded residence to wait for their victims to arrive. They soon received a call from Tony, informing them that the meeting had ended, that his adoptive parents had dropped him off at the hotel, and they were on their way home. The wait was not too long. As soon as the Blumels' vehicle stopped in front of the parking gate, the two attackers came out of their hiding place. Keisha immediately positioned herself on Melissa's side, while Andrew aimed at Roger to keep him still. Melissa, still surprised, recognized the mother of the children they had adopted more than 10 years ago to provide love, stability, and a better future. She only managed to say, "Oh my God, Keisha," when a precise shot to the head made her collapse in the seat. Roger, completely disconcerted, tried to assist his wife. Meanwhile, Keisha reached the man's window and pulled the trigger towards Roger's head, but the gun jammed. The woman made several attempts to shoot while he was frozen, with the slumped body of his wife next to him. Finally, the gun fired, and Roger also collapsed next to the one who had been the best partner for his life project. Once the fatal plan was carried out, Keisha and Andrew boarded the vehicle they had arrived in and quickly left. The Blumel spouses remained there until around 9:15 p.m., when Chris returned from his meeting and found the terrible scene. He immediately called 911, reporting that he had just arrived home and found his parents practically unconscious inside their van. The young man stated that Roger was coughing and that Melissa was bobbing her head up and down. Both had gunshot marks on their heads. The dispatcher instructed him to try resuscitation maneuvers while emergency services arrived a few minutes later and took over the situation. Miraculously, the Blumels were still alive, but their lives were hanging by a thread, so they were immediately transported to a hospital. While all this was happening, upon returning to the hotel where they were staying, Keisha seemed to have a panic attack and stated that all she needed was to consume some illicit substance, and she did so accompanied by the other boys. Also, at that moment, Keisha handed over the used gun and a wallet of Melissa's that she had stolen from the house to be disposed of in a nearby stream. Andrew threw the items into the pond of a nearby park. The following day, Tony began using the money stolen from his adoptive parents' home to start trafficking marijuana, earning his first $100. Unfortunately, that same day, Melissa lost her battle and passed away at the age of 53. Tony also went to the hospital to see his father, but what he did not know is that sometime before, he had been removed from both the Blumels' will and their insurance policies. Consequently, the two heinous crimes had been committed in vain. In the following days, it was also discovered that Andrew had not been paid and was even unaware that Keisha had taken cash from the Blumel family's home. Eventually, fate caught up with them. In the initial inspections of the Blumel residence, the police noticed that the garage door had been forced open, and inside the home everything was in disarray. There were items scattered everywhere. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other items had been stolen. The authorities wondered if the attack on the spouses had been a result of them arriving while the thieves were still in the house. However, the fatal assault had occurred before the couple entered the home, so this initial hypothesis was dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, there were no significant fingerprints, although investigators did find a bullet casing. Then, the authorities turned their attention towards the victims' workplaces, thinking perhaps an upset client had sought revenge. But this theory was also discarded, so it was time to talk to people close to the couple. The first on the detectives' list was Tony, as he had been the last person seen alive with the victims. But the young man insisted he knew nothing and had not participated in the act. According to him, after finishing dinner, he had gone straight back to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. This information was confirmed by the staff at the tolls. The second on the list was Chris, who had found the bodies, but he was quickly dismissed after verifying his statement that at the time of the incident, he was at a dinner with members of the wrestling team. However, the investigators found something strange in the young man's behavior. He didn't seem overly disturbed and instead appeared to be lost in thought. When the police pursued this direction and asked him what he thought had happened to his parents, Chris immediately replied that there was only one person who came to mind. He added that the only one who might hold any grudge against their parents, and perhaps be capable of such an act, was his older brother, Tony. With this significant lead, the authorities got a lucky break in their search for the culprits. A man contacted the police to say that a young man who was a friend of Tony had approached him intending to buy a gun. The detectives focused on this individual, and upon checking his background found he had a long history related to drugs. Moreover, they discovered he had traveled to California along with Tony. It was Braden. Sooner rather than later, Braden received a message from his family informing him that the sheriff's office investigators were looking to interrogate him about what had happened to the Blumels. The morning after receiving this information, Braden went to the police station. A press report states that on his way to the police station, he stopped by a pond to throw away something, apparently the guns used in the crime, which had not been disposed of as planned. According to this account, he was already under surveillance, and when the police searched the water, they found in the bag he threw a pistol that had not been fired in the attack. Braden's interrogation lasted for 3 days. At first, the young man maintained he had nothing to do with the incident, but he couldn't withstand the pressure from the authorities and ended up confessing everything he knew, stating that the idea for the attack had been Tony's. Tony Blumel, 18 years old, and his biological mother, Keisha, 35, were arrested on November 19th at the hotel where they were staying. Additionally, Andrew, then 18 years old, was arrested. And finally, Braden, also 18, was put behind bars on November 20th of that same year, 2013. At that time, Keisha did not admit her participation in the robbery and other crimes, although the 3 young men confessed what had happened. On November 25, 2013, the accused made their first appearance before the court via video conference. On that occasion, they were all charged with the same offenses: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. The 3 young men were set a bail of $500,000, and for Keisha, the bail was set at $1 million. On December 21st, Roger's heart stopped beating, and at 48 years old, he joined his beloved Melissa. And after Roger's death, the situation for the woman and the 3 young men worsened, as they could be charged with capital murder, which could imply a death penalty sentence. Indeed, on January 3, 2014, The 4 detainees were formally charged with a count of capital murder for being the alleged perpetrators of the death of more than one person in the same incident. Additionally, Keisha was charged with 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing took place on July 17th of that same year. By that time, Braden had negotiated with the authorities, and in exchange for a benefit in his sentence, he ended up becoming the prosecution's star witness. After a year of negotiations, not only did Braden reach an agreement, but 2 other individuals involved in the crime also negotiated with the prosecution. According to the agreements reached, the accused would not dispute the charges against them and would waive their right to appeal their sentences. In exchange, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty and to drop some charges. Starting in mid-2015, in separate hearings, each confirmed their decision to plead guilty. The judge sentenced Keisha to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the capital murder charge, and additionally to 122 months in prison for 2 counts of aggravated robbery. The sentences would be served consecutively. In her opportunity to speak, she stated she deeply regretted what had happened and lamented everything the Blumel family had to go through. The rest of her statement was controversial, as she claimed she had nothing to do with the incident, having no anger towards the Blumels. On the contrary, she had the utmost respect for them, as they had given Tony and Chris a wonderful life, and she would always be grateful for that. According to official records to this day, Keisha remains detained in a high-security-level correctional facility. The second to face his fate was her son, Anthony Blumel, known to everyone as Tony, who received the same sentence as his mother. During the sentencing hearing, Tony, who declined to speak when given the opportunity, heard the victim impact statement made by his aunt, Christina Blumel, who thanked the authorities for administering justice and referred to all the love that Roger and Melissa had given the boy. In complete silence, Tony listened to Christina's heartfelt words, and at one moment, tears almost sprang from the young criminal's eyes. In the end, the woman told Tony that he had chosen his path without anyone forcing him to make those decisions. She added that perhaps one day he might understand his choices, or perhaps he never would. Tony has been since then in a correctional facility. His record up to this moment listed a significant number of prison infractions related to smuggling, fights, unauthorized phone use, explicit sex, theft, and disobedience, among others. A week after these sentences, it was Andrew's turn, the only one who did not agree to acknowledge his responsibility and was found guilty of first and second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, plus 155 months. Finally, Braden, the last of the participants in the incident and who from the beginning had reached an agreement with the prosecution, was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 24.5 years in prison. According to his official record, his first opportunity for release will be on May 28, 2035. However, his prison record shows that far from reforming, Braden had received 71 disciplinary reports for disobedience, threats to others, stimulant use, intoxication, possession of tobacco contraband, theft, and dangerous smuggling, among other causes. In the end, the district attorney expressed satisfaction with the outcome of this case. It's worth noting that even though she had waived that right, Keisha attempted to appeal her sentences unsuccessfully. At the end of this story, only one thing remains undisputed. The lives of 2 wonderful people, Roger and Melissa Blumel, were cut short with a terrible and unnecessary ending. The bitterness, or perhaps the guilt of a woman who led a life of excess for which she gave up her children for adoption, was the genesis of the tragedy. She couldn't bear that one of her descendants wanted nothing more to do with her, which apparently led her to direct her anger at the people who gave all their love and well-being to her children. For his part, Tony repaid all the love and care received from that couple with resentment, envy, and violence, resorting to an unjustifiable path of substance abuse, and finally, a double crime. Keisha's younger daughter ended up being sent to a foster home. As for Chris Blumel, he managed to overcome what happened and has led a good life with the support of the family. And well, dear audience, that concludes today's case. Before you go, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to share this video if you think someone you know might be interested. See you in another episode of Unreal True Crime. Goodbye.
Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another Unreal True Crime. The horrible case of Laura Cielo Lopez. Laura Cielo Lopez was born on November 11, 2000, in the city of Plotier, Argentina. Her older sisters, Melissa and Damaris, adored her from the very first moment. When Laura was just 3 years old, her mother passed away in a car accident, leaving the 3 sisters in the care of their father. Initially, he worked hard to keep the family afloat, but a few years later, he fell into alcoholism. Despite the terrible things happening around her, Laura was a very sweet and affectionate child, which is why her sisters started calling her Cielo, or Heaven, in English, a nickname that everyone who knew her would eventually adopt. As the years went by, the girl's father lost his job, and all of them had to look for work. At 18, Laura spent her days selling fried cakes, then attended high school in the evening shift, and in her free time, she took care of her nephews. She was very close to graduating and dreamed of finding a good job to restore financial stability to her family. Unfortunately, an event occurred that prevented this from happening. On September 12, 2019, Cielo spent the entire afternoon with Damaris, serving her mate while she cleaned the house. Her sister joked that it was the first time she had made the infusion correctly. It was a cheerful day. Later, Cielo went to school, where her classmates noticed she was acting strange. She didn't sit in her usual spot, but at the back of the classroom, and left 20 minutes before class ended. Around 11:30 p.m., she arrived home, where she met up with some friends. They spent a good time chatting, drinking beer, and taking selfies to post on Instagram. At 3 in the morning, they said goodbye to Cielo because she was very tired and said she was going to sleep. The next day, Melissa wrote to her asking if she had gone to a medical appointment for an ear problem, but she got no response. She then called Damaris to find out if she was with her. The concern grew as Cielo was also not at her house. Hours passed, and the young woman still hadn't appeared, so they decided to report her missing to the police. Once at the police station, the officers told them they had to wait 48 hours from the last time they saw Cielo to request a search. They claimed she was probably with some boy, as this was supposedly common among teenagers. However, by Saturday, Cielo had not shown any signs of life, and the police finally took the report and began searching for her, but it was already too late. On Sunday the 15th, two fishermen, aged between 20 and 30, were carrying out their work in the area of the breakwaters of the Limay River. This location was only 15 kilometers from Cielo's house. They were calm until they saw something that took their breath away: the body of a young woman, cut into 8 parts, floating in the water. They quickly notified the authorities. On arrival, the first thing the authorities noticed was the brutality of the body's condition. It had clearly been cut by someone skilled with knives. The detectives continued to search the area to see if they could find clues about the victim's identity. Nearby, in the same river, they found some tights and underwear. Not far away, they found 2 rings and, eventually, a knife full of blood at the bottom of the river. They decided to call Cielo's family. When Damaris arrived at the scene and saw the objects, she did not doubt for a second that they belonged to her sister. The autopsy was conducted by Dr. Carlos, who noted that the cause of death had been a severe skull trauma, causing internal cerebral hemorrhage. The trauma was caused by a blow to the occipital part of the head, resulting in loss of consciousness. Cielo had been agonizing for 2 to 4 hours. Had she received medical attention, she might have survived. She also had bruises on her arms, indicating she had been struck and had struggled to save herself from her attacker. Moreover, the forensic examination confirmed what Cielo's sisters feared. The body had intimate injuries compatible with abuse. Finally, it indicated that due to the characteristics of the cuts on the neck, arms, and legs, it could be affirmed that the perpetrator used knives with a flat and scalloped edge, meaning they had no medical or anatomical knowledge, which broadened the list of suspects. The detectives had no idea who could have committed such a heinous crime. By analyzing the location of Cielo's cell phone, they detected that a man had contacted her after 3 in the morning on Friday. His name was Alfredo Escobar. He was 28 years old and worked as a mechanic. In the past, he had attended the same high school as Cielo. He was fond of fishing, which likely meant he knew how to handle a knife. The distance between his home and the crime scene was 2.5 kilometers, or about 20 blocks, which helped with the cell phone tower signals. At 3 o'clock, 3:22, 3:36, and 3:40 a.m. on September 13th, the young woman received 4 calls from this man. By then, the cell towers placed each of them in their respective homes. Then both cell phones were activated at her house. Starting at 4:29 a.m., the young woman's phone moved towards the downtown area and ended up at Escobar's residence. At 5 a.m., Cielo uploaded a WhatsApp story with an alien emoji. Her cell phone was still at the man's house. By 5:52 a.m., the young woman's mobile phone stopped emitting a signal, and after that, no one heard from her again. These records also showed that Escobar turned off his cell phone until 11:05 p.m. the next day. At that time, the phone was picked up by a cell tower in the place where Cielo's remains were later found. At 12:05 a.m. on Sunday, September 15th, he returned to his home. The investigation also included analysis of videos from 13 security cameras, including urban monitoring, private homes, and businesses, specifically reviewing footage from the early hours of September 13th. In 2 of these video records, 2 people could be seen walking back to back, resembling Cielo and Escobar, matching the young woman's cell phone movement. There was no doubt Escobar was the only suspect in the case. During the investigation, one of the officers recognized him, recalling an encounter a year prior. Escobar had crashed into a police patrol while driving at over 80 kilometers per hour, resisted arrest, and had an active case against him. He was close to going to trial for this incident, but now he faced a completely different and much more serious charge. On September 17th, A police watch was set up about 30 meters from Escobar's house. At 8:30 a.m., they saw a car arrive, and a young person who appeared to be the suspect got out. He entered the house and then came out accompanied by two adults around 60 years old. All three got into the vehicle. Without raising suspicion, the officers followed the vehicle for a while, noting that it stopped near a highway bridge. At that moment, Escobar and the older man got out of the car, and the police approached them to request their documentation. Escobar was in the company of his father, and the other person inside the vehicle was none other than his mother. It was clear they were attempting to flee the city. The young man did not resist the procedure but appeared extremely nervous. He asked if he could smoke and wanted to move away from the police car. When told this was not possible, he put out the cigarette, sat in his car, and lit one. After a while, he was taken to the police station, and the vehicle was confiscated. A few hours later, he underwent medical examinations, which revealed inflammation in the knuckles of his right hand, consistent with having thrown a punch. He also had cuts on one finger and a bruise on the palm of his right hand. These injuries dated back a few days, likely to the date of Cielo's death, probably incurred while attacking the young woman. Following these examinations, Escobar was formally charged with abuse, carnal access, and femicide, utilizing his right to remain silent. He was placed in pretrial detention for 6 months, as there was considered to be a risk of flight or obstruction of the investigation. On September 17th, the first search of the Escobar family's house was conducted. The property was large, with 60 meters in depth and 12 meters in front. In the back, there was a construction project of 2 apartments. Entering the room where Escobar slept, they discovered that the walls had marks. They tested them with luminol and found what they suspected: blood. Then they went to the backyard, where things only got worse. Among the vegetation, they found blood remains. It was clear that Cielo had received there the blow that caused her death. The investigators took the blood to compare it with Cielo's and Escobar's, and also ordered a DNA test on the fluid found on Cielo's body to see if it matched the suspects. Escobar's lawyer argued that until those results were available, they should not accuse him of abuse. Fortunately, the results arrived quickly. The Central Laboratory of the Ministry of Public Health compared the samples collected during the search with the genetic profile of the victim and the accused. All showed a match. They also analyzed the sneakers that Escobar was wearing at the time of his arrest and the knife found at the bottom of the river. Both items had Cielo's DNA on them. Then, 3 swabs were taken from the intimate areas, and one of them showed compatibility with Escobar's DNA. The investigators were now in a position to affirm that the subject had abused Cielo, then murdered her, dismembered her, and disposed of her body. On September 21, the justice system confirmed these findings during a press conference. The case prosecutor stated that he suspected the individual had murdered Cielo to hide the abuse. If found guilty of this charge, he would receive a life sentence. However, more evidence was still needed. Escobar declared himself innocent, but again, technology would expose him. His cell phone was confiscated, and by court order, he had to provide the access code for forensic analysis. It was found that although he had Cielo among his contacts, he had deleted her after the night of her disappearance. After committing the act, between 6 and 10 in the morning, he deleted the call log to the victim, but he did not delete their Facebook Messenger chat. The investigation also revealed that on September 11, 12, and 13, the subject had accessed this social network to view the photographs Cielo uploaded. Despite the evidence, the sinister man continued to claim his innocence, but everything was against him. A hypothesis was finally formulated about what happened on the night of the crime. On Thursday, September 12, 2019, Cielo left high school around 8 at night, returned home, and spent some time with friends until 3 in the morning, when she told them she was tired and would go to sleep. 40 minutes after she was left alone, she received a message from Escobar, and they began to chat. Although they knew each other from living in the same city and attending the same school, they were not friends. However, they had mutual acquaintances, which gave her confidence. After a while of chatting, the subject asked if she could come over. She calmly accepted, and at 4, he picked her up and went to his house. What happened in the house was a mystery, but considering the forensic analysis, it was believed that Cielo opposed having relations with the man. Completely enraged, he proceeded to abuse her. After committing the terrible act, he began to fear that she would report him. That's when he decided to take her life. He took her to the back of the house and hit her twice in the head. However, he did not achieve his goal. Cielo was still alive, agonizing. In a totally cruel act, Escobar hid her body for a couple of hours while thinking about what to do. He turned off his phone so that no one would bother him. Cielo's body was in the under construction part of the house for almost 24 hours. During that time, the contusion she had received took her life. Finally, the subject dismembered the body with a sharp knife from his kitchen, hid the body in his car, and drove 15 kilometers to the area at the Limahe River. He disposed of the body parts, throwing them away as if they were worthless. Once there, he turned his phone back on, relieved and believing he had finished the job. The story of the case became public, and all of city strongly condemned the accused. But the most striking declaration came from Escobar's 23-year-old younger sister, who posted a message on her social networks addressing both her brother and the victim. The publication received mixed reactions. Some people empathized with her, while others accused her of being complicit. Following these attacks, the girl asked that the focus not be lost on what was important, Cielo and her family. She demanded that the fight continue so that there would be no more victims of femicide. Melissa, on her part, contacted Escobar's sister and thanked her for the post. She also requested that people stop attacking her, as she was not to blame. Then the trial against the accused began. In the first hearing, the prosecutor accused Escobar of being the only responsible for the act. The charge was for aggravated homicide against a woman, involving gender violence and abuse with carnal access. In that same hearing, the experts who had intervened in the analysis of the clothing found in the river alongside the remains, and in the evidence found at the bottom of the subject's home, testified. But the most striking confession came from Cielo's best friend. During the trial, she recounted that for months, Escobar had been sending messages to Cielo, inviting her to have a good time and drink beer, but they had never had a date. For her part, she had known him for about 5 years and was aware of his bad reputation. For a long time, Escobar's house had been a party place. Every weekend, the house was filled with alcohol and substances, and there were even couples who had intimacy in front of the rest of those present. She had attended those gatherings but decided to distance herself from that environment when she started a relationship and became pregnant. She emphasized that Cielo had never gone with her. She repeatedly advised Cielo not to meet with Escobar. Cielo always said she wouldn't and that she ignored his messages. However, the defense asked why she didn't recommend Cielo to block the contact. Firmly, she replied that it was her friend's decision, and she didn't want to tell her what to do with her life. While she remained on the stand, she was shown the security camera footage from the day Cielo disappeared. They specifically showed her the footage from 4 in the morning, where 2 people were seen walking backwards through downtown. She had no doubt in recognizing that it was Cielo. She said that her sneakers, her coat, and her way of walking were unmistakable, and she also identified Escobar. As if this witness was not enough, Another woman expressed her need to testify against the accused. The prosecution and the victim's family requested that her name remain anonymous and that the accused not be present. The judge granted the request, but allowed the accused to stay on one side of the room, out of the witness's sight. The woman narrated that, some time before the incident, Escobar had gone out with her. They met through Facebook, the same social network through which he contacted Cielo. They bought 2 beers and took a walk around the neighborhood, then bought 2 more beers. It was then that Escobar invited her to his house, with clear intentions of intimacy. She told him she didn't want to, and the man appeared frustrated, but did not force her. She told him she wanted to change, to be someone new. They were together until about 2 in the morning. Once Escobar returned home, he messaged her again, asking her to have sex. He insisted for a while, but she stopped responding. It was probably at that moment that he contacted Cielo. When the girl found out he was the main suspect in the incident, she was in shock. She hesitated a lot before going to the police station, thinking that if she talked to him, she might convince him to turn himself in voluntarily, but that didn't happen. After hearing the statement, the defense asked if Escobar had been violent towards her in an attempt to discredit her story. She replied that he had not. However, Escobar's impulsive behavior was evident when a friend testified against him, saying he was a womanizer with a substance addiction. His ex-partner also took the stand, stating they had not ended on good terms. Years earlier, she had reported him because she suspected that he had broken into her house and stolen her money. When she confronted him to return her things, Escobar hit the friend who was with her. In response to these statements, the accused tried to defend himself, pointing to a friend who was also his drug dealer as the perpetrator of the crime. He narrated that on the night in question, he was under the influence of substances, and this man was with Cielo at his house. At one point, Escobar heard a scream from one of his rooms and ran to see what had happened. Once he saw the blood, he focused on cleaning it up, then helped his friend hide Cielo's body, referring to it as that thing. At the end of his story, he thanked for having the space to share his version of the truth. However, no evidence was found, and this statement did not prosper. Escobar remained the only suspect. In his closing argument, the prosecutor argued that the man had taken advantage of his prior knowledge of the victim and betrayed her trust. He planned the brutality of his actions and the despicable manner in which he had dismembered and hidden the body. He asserted that the accused had a contemptuous relationship with women, evidenced when he referred to Cielo's body as that thing. The jury's deliberation took only 40 minutes. In a unanimous verdict, Escobar was found guilty of abuse with carnal access and homicide. The latter had the aggravating factor of having been carried out to hide the abuse and for involving gender violence. For this reason, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Although the case did not go unpunished and tranquility was restored to the community, the problem has not been solved. The rate of cases in Argentina continues to rise every minute. The case of Cielo highlights the need for a program to educate children, young people, and adults on gender issues. The young woman's family launched an initiative to make this possible. In September 2020, almost a year after the murder, the Cielo Lopez Law was approved. This law mandates training on the subject for students and teachers at all levels of the provincial educational system to prevent violence against women. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon. Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The mysterious case of Jonia Berry. In a small American town called Bristol, Tennessee, Jonia Berry was born on August 26, 1983. She was a happy and friendly person who had many friends and loved to have fun at parties. When she was in school, she was also part of the local cheerleading team. After finishing high school, Jonia went to East Tennessee State University to study psychology and criminology. During her college years, she met Jason White, and they became a couple, eventually getting engaged right before they graduated. In late 2004, when she was 21 years old, Jonia decided to get a master's degree in psychology. This led her to move temporarily to Knoxville, another city, for her studies. While studying, she worked part-time at a children's educational center and discovered her passion for helping children. Her boyfriend, Jason, continued his studies in a different state, working towards a law degree. Even though they were far apart, they stayed in touch and planned their wedding. In Knoxville, Jonia initially stayed in her friend Jason Amami's apartment. They both went to college together and later moved to Knoxville. They shared an apartment with 2 bedrooms, and Jason let Jonia stay there until she found her own place. Jonia had 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. On the Sunday night of December 5th, after finishing work at the store, Jonia went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. When she got back home, she wrapped presents for the children at the educational center, talked to her neighbor, and then went to her room. She also spoke to her boyfriend on the phone before going to bed. Around 4 in the morning, Jason Amami heard a scream from a woman. He thought Jonia was having a bad dream, so he went to her room. But instead, he found a stranger with a knife. The stranger attacked Jason, and they had a fight. Eventually, Jason managed to push the attacker away and ran out of the apartment. He went to the nearest convenience store, which was almost a kilometer away, to call for help. When the store clerk saw Jason, who was covered in blood, they called 911. Jason explained what had happened to the police when they arrived. The police went to their apartment and found Jonia in the hallway that connected 5 apartments. She was still alive but barely conscious. When they asked her about the attacker, she could only give weak clues. The police searched the whole building and the area nearby, but they couldn't find the attacker. They rushed Jonia to the nearest hospital, but the doctors couldn't save her, even though they tried their best. The doctors said she had more than 20 stab wounds, and it was very unlikely she could survive. As for Jason, he had 8 wounds from the attacker, but only one was very serious. He got medical help, and his life was not in danger. Meanwhile, the detectives started to investigate the crime scene. They found blood in the hallway, showing that Jonia had tried to ask her neighbors for help, but no one had opened their doors. Right next to Jonia's room, they found the murder weapon, which turned out to be a kitchen knife that belonged to Jason. The attacker had used it with such force that it got bent and damaged. The police also found blood near the back door of the apartment and on the stairs leading to the street. Since Jason and Jonia had left through the front door, the detectives thought the most likely explanation was that the killer had escaped through the back door. In Jason's room, they discovered another clue, a partial footprint, which the attacker might have left when he followed Jason and attacked him. Because of the brutal way the attacker had taken Jonia's life, the police suspected that the motive behind the crime was personal. At first, the detectives started looking into Jonia's boyfriend, even though he was far away, about 1,000 kilometers from Knoxville. But all his friends and family said that Jonia and her boyfriend had a wonderful relationship, and he had no reason to commit such a cruel crime. He found out about Jonia's death when her mother called him at 10 in the morning. He said that after hearing the news, he fainted and took a long time to recover. He was in no condition to do anything, so he had to ask his neighbor to help him book a plane ticket and pack his suitcase. The investigators carefully checked his alibi and realized that he couldn't have physically traveled to Knoxville and back by morning. So, they ruled him out as a suspect and turned their attention to Jonia's neighbor instead. In contrast to the victim's boyfriend, this neighbor had no solid alibi and had been inside the apartment with her, raising suspicions that he might be the culprit. Friends and family of Jonia were also skeptical of him. Some believed he could be the likely killer, while others accused him of fleeing the apartment, leaving Jonia behind. This suspicion ran so deep that the victim's parents didn't even want him to attend her funeral. Shortly after Jason was released from the hospital, investigators began questioning him. He stuck to his initial account. He heard screams, saw an unfamiliar man, and was attacked. After managing to fend off the attacker, Jason rushed to the front door and out into the street, seeking help from the neighbors. He believed that Jonia had also managed to escape the apartment because he couldn't hear her screams. However, the police had reservations about accepting this version of events. What initially raised doubts about Jason were his injuries. 7 of the 8 wounds were superficial, and the last one on his right arm could have been acquired either while defending himself or during an attack. Additionally, investigators found no signs of forced entry into the apartment, suggesting that the person responsible might have been inside already. Jason claimed that he had taken out the trash through the back door that night, but couldn't remember if he had locked it or not. Detectives continued to press him, paying close attention to which door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason insisted that he had left through the front door, but the police suspected he might be lying. If Jason had indeed exited through the back door, it would explain the presence of bloodstains near the door leading to the stairs, further raising suspicions against him. Moreover, the police accused him of using and selling illegal drugs and of being aggressive when he couldn't get his fix. The young man denied all these allegations, but investigators continued to level various charges against him. After several hours at the police station, the detectives proposed a polygraph test of him. Surprisingly, Jason agreed. The investigators brought in an expert who asked him leading questions, and at the end of the session, they informed him that he had failed the test, indicating that he was providing false answers. Upon hearing this, Jason became emotionally distraught, shouting that he had nothing to do with the crime, that his life was in danger, and that the real criminal was still on the loose. However, the detectives remained unconvinced. Nevertheless, they couldn't charge him with the murder due to the lack of concrete evidence. They had to wait for laboratory experts to complete their examination of the few pieces of evidence found in the apartment, and an unexpected twist soon emerged. During their analysis of the murder weapon, the knife, they discovered 3 DNA samples, those of the deceased girl, Jason, and an unidentified man. Additionally, the unknown man's DNA was found in Jonia's room, on the back door handle, and on the staircase used by the criminal to exit onto the street. Furthermore, they uncovered a fingerprint on the knife handle, marked by the victim's blood, that did not match Jason's fingerprint. These discoveries led the police to doubt that Jason was the murderer. The evidence strongly indicated that another person had been in the apartment that night. However, when they checked the DNA sample against existing databases, they found no matches. Even though investigators had ruled out Jason as a suspect, public opinion continued to cast doubt on him, accusing him of leaving his girlfriend behind and fleeing instead of protecting her. Furthermore, Jason started experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. A significant development soon came to light. It was revealed that the polygraph operator had misinterpreted the test results, and there was no indication that Jason was lying. Additionally, there was no concrete evidence linking the young man to illegal substances. It had been used as leverage, but more importantly, the severity of Jason's injuries had been initially underestimated. In reality, Jason had suffered serious damage to his lung and neck, with little hope for a full recovery. Due to these inaccuracies in police reports, the insurance company only covered 25% of his treatment costs, leaving Jason facing severe financial hardship. Once the police no longer considered him a suspect, they began questioning Jason as a witness. From his account, they managed to create a rough description of the attacker. The situation was complicated by the fact that Jason hadn't gotten a clear look at the assailant's face. The apartment was dimly lit, and the attacker had pounced on him as soon as he exited the room. The investigators also stumbled upon something intriguing in Jonia's room: a cap, along with discs, and a stereo player near the back staircase. Initially, they thought these items might belong to either the victim or Jason, but Jason denied any connection to them. According to him, none of these items were in his apartment, suggesting they were left behind by the killer. The investigators shared a rough sketch of the suspect with the media, and after it was publicized, the police received hundreds of leads. People reported individuals who vaguely resembled the sketch, prompting detectives to pursue each of these leads. One lead stood out to the investigators. They learned about a group of teenagers in the area who had been breaking into houses with the intent to steal. One of these teenagers, a 19-year-old named Michael, bore a resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The police initiated a search for him, which was complicated because he was already wanted for theft. Now, with the possibility of his involvement in a murder, 2 police units joined the search for Michael. They eventually located him and brought him in for questioning. The investigators immediately focused on Michael's shoes, which had a tread pattern similar to the footprint left by the killer. They collected a DNA sample and fingerprints from Michael and sent them to the experts for analysis. Meanwhile, they interrogated him, and during this process, they received an unexpected revelation. Michael quickly admitted that he and a friend had indeed entered Jonia's apartment that night. According to his account, they had planned to steal valuable items, but his friend had taken a knife and attacked Jonia. However, the detectives soon began to doubt Michael's story. Firstly, the details he provided didn't align with the actual events. Secondly, there was no evidence of the presence of 2 strangers at the crime scene. The laboratory results further confirmed their skepticism. Michael's DNA and fingerprints did not match those found at the murder scene. The same held true for his shoes. The tread pattern did not match the one in Jason's room. Ultimately, the police concluded that Michael had fabricated the story. While it may sound unusual, such false admissions occur relatively frequently in high-profile cases. Some individuals falsely claim guilt for various reasons, including seeking attention or hoping for a reward for information. It remains unclear what motivated Michael, but his story turned out to be entirely untrue. Following that, investigators interviewed over 1,000 potential suspects and gathered around 400 DNA samples, but none of them matched the evidence. Early in the investigation, a reward had been offered for information leading to the case's resolution. As each month passed, the reward amount increased, and by December 2005, 1 year after the murder, it had reached $60,000. Adding to this, the state governor chipped in an additional $20,000 from his own funds, drawing even more public attention to the case. Despite the abundance of leads, all of them eventually led to dead ends, and the case remained unsolved for several years. In 2007, the victims' parents decided to take action by seeking changes in state legislation. They found it perplexing that the fingerprints and DNA of the murderer were not in any databases. Given the brutality of the crime, the parents refused to believe it was the perpetrator's first offense. They later discovered that, according to Tennessee laws, fingerprints and DNA samples were only collected from convicted criminals. Jonia's parents were determined to change this. They played an active role in crafting a new law that mandated the collection of these samples from all individuals arrested for violent crimes. Authorities supported this initiative, and the law was enacted in May 2007. 2 months later, a breakthrough occurred in the case. The police arrested Taylor Lee Olson, a 22-year-old, for violating the terms of his probation. Olson had a long history of criminal activities, primarily involving theft, check forgery, and auto theft, and he had been arrested multiple times before. Surprisingly, his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected, even though he had a history of run-ins with the law. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, but his criminal activities persisted. It was revealed that Olson had already come to the investigators' attention 5 months earlier when they received a tip about his possible involvement in the murder. However, for reasons unknown, the police had not pursued DNA samples for analysis at that time. Nevertheless, with his new arrest for probation violation, they finally decided to question him about Jonia's case. Olson eventually confessed his involvement in the murder and willingly provided a DNA sample. When the lab results came in, it was confirmed that Taylor's DNA was a complete match with the sample found in the victim's apartment. Following this, they collected his fingerprints, which also matched the fingerprint on the murder weapon. Olson was subsequently arrested, and detectives began to question him. Initially, Olson said he was not guilty, but he eventually decided to confess to his actions. Taylor claimed that on that night, he had intended to steal Jonia's car and had entered her apartment through the back door to find the car keys. When he entered her room, she woke up and began screaming. In response, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times. However, he insisted that he hadn't intended to kill anyone, and it had all occurred accidentally. Detectives had doubts about the truthfulness of some details and leaned towards believing that Taylor had premeditated the murder. It was possible that he had been stalking the victim for some time, indirectly supported by the fact that Jonia's friends had reported someone following her in a car. At the time, no evidence was found to substantiate this, but after Olson's arrest, it seemed increasingly plausible. Despite this, there was little doubt about his culpability. His DNA and fingerprints were present on the murder weapon, strongly indicating his involvement. Olson's trial was slated to commence in mid-2008, and by that point, he had already retained a lawyer. Apparently, his legal counsel advised him to retract his confession, and Taylor presented a new version of events to the detectives. Now, he claimed that he had entered Jonia's apartment with his friend named Noah Cox. According to this revised account, when Olson entered Jonia's room to retrieve the car keys, she allegedly woke up, seized a knife, and stabbed him several times. Olson then fled through the back door, while his friend entered Jonia's room, disarmed her, and killed her. This new narrative raised suspicions among the police. They found no fingerprints or DNA from other individuals at the crime scene, making it appear unlikely that anyone else was involved. Detectives awaited the start of the trial, but it never occurred. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Alongside him, several suicide notes were discovered, addressed to his family, Jonia's relatives, and the police. In the note to the detectives, he once again alleged that his friend Noah Cox was the actual perpetrator and also apologized to Jonia's family and his own. Detectives continued to believe that Olson was responsible for the murder and repeatedly questioned No. However, they found no evidence implicating him. Jonya's parents also remained skeptical, believing that Olson was lying. In their view, if Taylor was truly innocent, he wouldn't have taken his own life. It seemed more likely that he simply did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Furthermore, for several months following his initial confession, Olson had consistently maintained that he had entered the apartment alone and that there was no one else with him. The sudden change in his story to shift blame onto his friend raised further doubts. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Crime Analysis Central. See you soon.